Hi, I am Robin Zebrowski, and I am a professor of cognitive science at Beloit College in Wisconsin in the United States. Um, and cognitive science, I have a joint appointment, which means I also teach philosophy as well as computer science and psychology. But my highest degree, my PhD, is in philosophy, so I still do an awful lot of writing in the field of philosophy. Um, I am going to tell you very briefly today about this amazing new book, Philosophy for Girls. And I was very lucky that I was able to contribute a chapter to this book. And one thing I want to say is I know that the girls word is kind of tricky here. And I don't want it to seem like this book is meant to block anyone out of philosophy. The idea here is more that it's an invitation to people who have traditionally been excluded from the discipline. And so it's not just for girls in general, it's for everyone who doesn't see themselves as a cis white male, which is the traditional understanding of a philosopher. I still remember a couple years ago, one of my undergraduate students was like, I can't major in philosophy, I don't have a beard. And so this idea that philosophy is for old white men is still alive and well. And this book is meant to say, look, this is a discipline that's available to many, many other kinds of people. And so I'm going to tell you very quickly about the questions that I raise in the chapter in the hopes that it will spark your interests in pursuing this further. When I did my first master's degree, it was through a philosophy department, but it was a master's in philosophy, artificial intelligence, and cognitive science, the study of the mind in general. And I was the only woman in my program, and I didn't quite even register that at first. I hadn't been a thing on my mind. And as my degree went on, I started realizing that I was treated a little differently. Very importantly, not by my core professors, but by other professors in other classes that I had to take for the degree. And so it strikes me looking back how strange it is that it wasn't that long ago and I was the only woman in the program, especially considering something like artificial intelligence, the ways that it is impacting our lives right now, the importance in everyone's life. Even if you don't recognize that it's important in your life, it seems all the more egregious that there were no other women in my program at the time. So the chapter that I wrote for this is on technology generally. So it's not just about any one technology, but it's about technology broadly. And I started by talking about Frankenstein. So you know the general story of Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein makes a monster that he can't control, and he has lots of regrets about his bad life choices. The story is, of course, written by Mary Shelley. So it's a woman writing a story about a man who interacts with technology and builds something that he loses control of. And then Victor Frankenstein kind of tries to hide from it all, and he doesn't want to take responsibility for what he's done. It's hard not to see an analogy between Frankenstein and so much of what's happening right now with social media companies, with algorithms and the way they're rolled out in ways that you may not even realize, but like Facebook was first written as a way to rate the hotness of women in Mark Zuckerberg's class. So like the ways that it has grown out of his control and that he continues to disavow any responsibility for is just a really good analogy here with the story that Mary Shelley gave us. So some of the questions that I ask in my chapter are things like, what is technology? What are technologies? And of course, there's the obvious stuff, computers and artificial intelligence, but lots of other things are technologies as well, and we don't always think of them that way. So things like shoes and fire, all of these things are technologies, and all of them deserve the same kinds of critical engagement. Why are things built the way they're built? Who are they built for? Who do they exclude in that building? And all kinds of these sorts of questions that are raised around technologies in general. And so I also talk a little bit about things that are even less obviously technology, things like books. This is a technology. This is, whoops. This is a technology. This object is technology. And so is language. Language itself is a kind of technology. And so part of what I want to do with this chapter is to say, you might not realize that some of the questions you're already asking are questions that philosophy is interested in. And in fact, if you are someone who has been traditionally excluded from this sort of work, you probably have perspectives on these questions that are being overlooked. Like, we want you, please come give us your perspectives on these questions. Um, and so one of the questions that I ask also is not just like, what is a technology, but where do you stop and the tools begin? So what is at that interface between you and the technology? There are some really, really important questions. So there are questions about whether certain technologies seem like they're parts of our minds, whether they're parts of ourselves. So something like a calculator, like when you're in math class and you need an external tool to do some of the math, it seems like there's a way in which that calculator is actually a part of your mind, a part of the thought at the very least that's going on to solve the problem, right? Um, but what about like Google? Is Google reasonably understood as a part of you or as a part of your mind when you're using it to solve certain kinds of problems? What about other people? Could they be parts of your mind or even a part of yourself? Um, and think about things like prosthetic limbs. If you have a prosthetic limb, is that external tool a part of you? Is it a part of your cognition, your mind, or do we still want to think of it as external? Is that more properly thought of as internal? And of course, this question gets even more obvious when you think of something like a pacemaker, right? Or a cochlear implant, things that are literally embedded in your body, but they're technologies, they're tools. And the question is, where do you stop? And where does the rest of the world begin? So lots of questions about the nature of technology in the chapter that I wrote for Philosophy for Girls. Think about the ways that certain kinds of algorithms are affecting our lives in ways, again, that you might not realize. They're being used to filter job applications. So when you want to apply for a job, you might not realize that first they're being run through a program that's looking for keywords and for things that look like a good fit with the company. But we already know a bunch of those algorithms are biased against women or against minorities. And so doing sort of a deep dive and making sense of how these things work and how they're biased in these ways is a really important job right now. And again, when I started working in artificial intelligence more than 20 years ago, this was mostly really pie in the sky theoretical stuff. And in the last 5 or 10 years, of course, you know that this is every headline now is talking about the ways that algorithms can be biased against certain people. And so the chapter that I've written, where I hope you will read it, especially if you are in high school thinking about what you want to do, or early in college. I think that the book in general, and of course not just my chapter, all of the chapters here are amazing. But they're designed to bring you in and to say, look, you may have felt that this is not a discipline open to you. It is, and it has been. You'll find all kinds of stuff about historical women philosophers, historical non-men philosophers, and contemporary philosophers that are not cis white men. And I really hope that you'll give it a chance. And I hope that I'm going to see some of you in my philosophy classes someday soon.